This is Jono's World, conversation for everyone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Jono's World, episode 8. I have with me today someone who has grown up very different than everyone else. She has done everything from survived cults. She's been misdiagnosed by doctors. She has tumbled through trying to find peace and safety in a world that really hasn't provided it for her. So go ahead and introduce yourself, and we
Hi.
will get on talking.
Hi, I'm Sierra. Yeah, and I've been through some stuff that we're gonna chat about today.
Yeah. And so, when did when did you first encounter like a religious setting?
I was raised in a Christian setting from a very young age. The first church we went to when I was single digits, maybe kindergarten, preschool age, I remember was Presbyterian church. That met locally. Really beautiful campus that was nestled up with boulders like jutting into the building. It was a super cool building. And then we changed over to Lutheran, and that's where I started playing music on the worship band in 7th grade. We were the coolest worship team in the Grand Canyon Synod. So our team would get invited to play for the meeting with all of the pastors and the bishop and stuff like that once a year. And I was like, 13, 12, up there playing bass. Stuff from the early 90s Hillsong. I remember we would, Agnus Dei, the really like, the one that goes like, holy, holy, your Lord God.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I still associate that with Christmas because we would do that at the Christmas Eve service, and it was a good arrangement.
Yeah.
Yeah. From there, I went to a Christian high school, Christian university, and then went to work for a parachurch organization where we met.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Now, when along those lines did you, start having internal conflicts with Christianity?
I was really lucky where changing denominations a few times and like going to a Christian high school that had people from multiple denominations attending there from sophomore to senior year, and then into a Baptist university, and then into a charismatic stream parachurch org. I always just really focused on the major like creed type beliefs, and I had been raised in an environment of flexibility for the secondary and tertiary and so on doctrinal things.
Yeah.
And so the ups and downs of that is I didn't have a lot of struggles younger, particularly because growing up, when I was a little kid, I didn't really care. Church was a place to go play kickball and eat a donut after. But when I was 11, I had some very difficult circumstances arise in my personal life, and I needed answers. Due to the nature of the circumstances, my parents were not as available to talk through things because they were focusing on, and so I just started really paying more attention at church. It's when I got my bass guitar, so I got pulled onto the worship team, so I was sitting in 2 to 3 services a weekend, depending. Or was it 1 to 2? I don't remember. It's been a long time.
A lot.
Yeah, but so yeah, it wasn't really a thing I super duper questioned growing up, and it wasn't really until I was in an environment that had differed from the more open ones I grew up in while I was working at the parachurch org we used to work at. There was a push for certainty. I had misunderstood their non-denominationalism as being like open, but they were still very niche. They're just not a denominational name for the niche that they are. But they have the strict set of unique beliefs that they follow.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
non-denominational churches is a good way of saying we're a church without any outside accountability who wrote our
Exactly.
own doctrine and rules. And who knows where our pastor got his degree or even if he has one. But we just
Exactly.
decided to do our own thing on our own terms
Yeah.
without any accountability.
Yeah. And I had completely misunderstood the concept to mean something else of like where we're like not gonna, we're trying to be more unified than the denominational,
Right.
like, and it, yeah. And so that was very surprising for me to suddenly be in an environment with very strict, unified asks of people on their beliefs. And it ended up being something I rubbed up against a lot because I didn't realize until I had been there a while that was like the actual, because they do speak about themselves as though there's an openness there, but in practice that wasn't what I ended up experiencing. Yeah.
And what kind of context are we talking about, like with the openness?
So it would be just kind of the centrality of Christ, but not needing a specific eschatology or, even just freedom to broaden on soteriology, even to like, I get a little nerdy on that with like original versus ancestral sin and Christus Victor versus penal substitutionary atonement. Like,
Right.
we agree that Jesus saved us, right? Okay, so is there space on the rest of that?
Yeah. Yep. I don't even know what I believe anymore. So
Me either,
Oh,
to be
yeah.
honest. Yeah, I'm still figuring that out because I'm in disentangling, or untangling is the word, from, being in all of these environments and still working through, especially with what we've been experiencing in our shared community lately. There's a lot of stuff I'm going back and questioning again.
Right. And now, when did, if you don't mind talking about this, along the lines of like, your church, when did you suddenly, notice girls? Was it
Was not
early on?
it was
Or-
not until I left working for a parachurch org that I even let myself start considering that question, to be honest.
So you had it. It's like,
Yeah, I because of the nature of some of the stuff I had gone through in high school,
right.
there was a lot of trauma around the idea of a relationship for me. And so I was like, I have to work through this and work through having healthy friendships. So it's kind of a weird framework, and it's very, I don't meet a lot of people that are as introspective in the way that I was, even at a young age.
Right.
So junior year of high school, some stuff happened where I got kicked out of my father's house and disowned. And after that happened, someone in my life came to me and started talking to me about experiences they had had observing him and how he treated us, but that she had felt I was too young to really get into that with me at the time she was observing it. And so it was when I was a junior of high school and I was going through the trauma of he was threatening to have me arrested after kicking me out of the house for a theological disagreement, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he went 1611 AV King James only independent fundamental Baptist, thought I was under his umbrella a la Gothard, stuff like that. So we started to butt heads a bit. So someone that was helping me walk through, being under threat of being arrested by him and stuff like that, started to tell me about experiences they had had with him. And I realized everything I thought socially and relationally that I knew is built on a faulty framework that came from a deeply disturbed person. And so I questioned every relational social thought I had starting at like age 17. So working through the late years of high school, early years of college, trying to figure out like relationally stuff going on while being at a Christian school and a Christian university where there was a lot of the religious drama that happens relationally, where there's just not really good conflict resolution and everything's blamed on sin and stuff like that. I kept running up against these, what turned out to be Christian dysfunctions that I was thinking were human dysfunctions. And so it was causing that process of reworking my relational framework to kind of go funky. And so I was still working on that in my mid to late 20s because of the environments I was in, which turned out to be cult abuse, and I'm not the problem, but it probably made me an easier target for a lot of the stuff I experienced, to be honest, because I'm a person with, it wasn't like an identity framework or anything. It was literally, I was trying to understand how other people view relationships to try and learn what I knew that my model growing up was not teaching me well.
Yeah.
But then I kept running up against everyone has different rules. And then I was like, oh, no one knows.
Right.
Okay, maybe I can start looking into like romantic relationships and stuff now because like, oh, like no one's actually there. And I was doing a Sisyphean task that was always going to roll back downhill.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of experienced the same thing. Like you just go along with the beliefs. And go along with the beliefs, and go along with the beliefs. And you have things blocked out. You don't let yourself think certain things. You don't let yourself, like, you really, especially for someone who's neurodivergent, you really you can block out and
it's like turning off a pedal on a guitar pedal board.
Yeah, you really can. And so, like, I get how you would just continue on. I mean, I did the same thing. And then you land in an environment that is pretty extreme, pretty intense, the same one I was in.
Yep.
No, I was there for a lot longer. I was there for I did my 10 years.
Wow.
So, and I didn't become an apostle. You land. What year do you land at the International House of Prayer in Kansas?
I started listening to their teachings in like 2007, and I wanted to quit college and go do the media internships where they were paying people to come and get trained. I was literally looking at that email thinking about dropping out of college, sophomore year of college, which would have been 2007, 2008. I came out between junior and senior year of college and did the second ever Forerunner Evangelism Intensive for the summer because it was the only thing that worked with my school schedule. I thought that it would count as a staff internship because I was like, I am thinking about checking this place out, doing like a gap year before medical school while I get everything together. And it would be cool to like join staff and play there for a year. So what internship can I do to prepare for that now? And this was a live-in internship where they fed you and stuff, just like the other two internships that were, or the three. I think there was intro one thing, and Fire in the Night.
Intro, Fire in the Night, yeah. One thing, and then Simeon's.
Yeah. And so I was wrong. And it was supposed to count like for a semester credit of the ministry school there, and then they rescinded that when they took the school international and stuff like that. So it was just like constantly I thought I signed up for this, which they never advertised that FEI would be staff equivalent, but yeah, that's a whole whatever. But so it was the summer right before the Student Awakening happened.
Okay, so 2009.
Yeah, 2009. And then I moved back in December of 2010 after visiting for Thanksgiving 2009, coming to One Thing 2009, and then visiting in June of 2010. And I like was involved. They baptized like 900 people. I personally dunked 40 or 50 of them and was like the towel girl for 300, because they had the two or three different tubs there. And I was like at one of the tubs all night, the whole night, every time they were doing that.
Yeah.
So I was like working there because I was doing the evangelism booth, trying to recruit people to programs during the day, even though I wasn't on staff or anything. Like I worked my first One Thing I ever attended.
Yeah. Oh, that's an easy place to get plugged in. They are looking for volunteers like crazy.
So yeah, December 2010 is when and then I didn't say when I ended. I left staff May of 2016. And the last time I ever played a set was summer of 2017, I want to say. But I stayed involved doing meetings after I left staff until late 2018. And then I left Kansas City September of 2019 to just like, this place is beyond any help. Goodbye.
Wow, so you were there a lot longer than I thought you were. So what was, student awakening? That's a whole, bag of onions.
Yes.
Um, and, a lot can be said about what actually transpired. But
Yeah.
when you were overall, how looking back, like what was your experience at IHOP?
So when I first rolled into town, I remember the first 2 weeks started seeing things that I didn't really feel like were represented on the online teachings or what the program I was in was advertised as seemed just slightly different than what I felt it had been described as
Right.
from the get-go. And I wanted to get in my car and leave. I wanted to ask for my $2,400 back and go back to Texas. And I would miss out on the trip to Indonesia that I was going to, it was either go to Indonesia for 2 weeks for missions or come to Kansas City and do 3 months in the evangelism intensive. And I was like, I feel like everyone goes overseas to learn how to witness, but what if I learned how to do it in my own culture? And I got to experience growing in prayer at the same time. So I had been under teaching at the church I attended in college in Waco, which is actually, sidebar, prophetically tied to the prophetic history of IHOP KC indirect, like through, there's the person who took over Metro, I'm not going to say their name, but the person who took over Metro for Mike in the prophetic history, which I'm sorry to even bring that word into the conversation.
No, we can go there and talk about
it. It's a thing. It's a thing. I'm sorry. He is on the board of directors at the church I went to in college in Texas. And the pastor of the church I went to in college came up to Kansas City during the Kansas City Prophets fallout era.
94.
And so the prophetic history of that church in Waco being founded is tied to the same spiritual fathers as
Jones,
the place where we met. Yeah. And so that's how I found out about the place where we met. It was a sidebar. What question was I answering when I rabbit holed?
Just we were talking about your experience as a whole, like
so yes.
What it looked like.
I remember. So I had already been under this teaching that when you're brought somewhere, then God has placed you under the spiritual authority that he has put above you and the leaders and the teachers that you were before.
Okay,
I had been taught that at the church in Texas. And so
I was taught the same thing.
Exactly. And so I was hearing this stuff where I was like, I went to a 5-figure a year Christian high school, where we had an hour of Bible class every day, and we were taking through, hermeneutics and blah, blah, blah. And so we were taught to read, another sidebar, 3 translations minimum. And one of them had to be from, the majority, it got to that level, Textus Receptus, blah, blah, blah. That's the source text that's used versus, the Latin, anyway. We had to actually know that about the versions we were using. So one of them had to be the King James, but then another one had to be the NIV, and you had to also go concept for concept versus word for word, so that you could get, the cord of 3 strands with your 3 different translations. You could get the truth out of what they share, which goes back to my whole multi-denominational centrality of blah, blah, blah. So all that to say, what was I saying? ADHD is bad, guys.
No, ADHD is bad, but you were talking about how...
So I had doctrinal disagreements, and I was the way they're talking about these scriptures is not... I have never even heard some of these before, and we went into that stuff.
Yeah.
And there was just certain ways with the approach that the teachers were doing and stuff like that, where I was like, this is not the way I was taught to use this, to go to this book.
Right.
And going to the largest Baptist university on the planet that has a seminary in it, I was taught, the actual Christian history, how the different denominational disagreements developed, taught the actual looking at the Bible with textual criticism that you would do for literature by seminary students, taught some of the Hebrew, like we had to know in a scholarly way.
The basics. Yeah.
And so I was just like, these scholarly ways are like developed for a reason so that we're not like missing out on the historical lens.
And you were noticing those weren't being followed.
And I just was not seeing that. Like, I was not seeing that in the way some of the stuff was being presented, especially when it came to prophecy and stuff like that, too.
And a lot of it was being not just... I mean, a lot of the ways that they were interpreting stuff was just outright non-historical. And they were saying that it was historical. Exactly. And, you know, Mike does not have a Bible degree. Just so everybody knows. All right. So in this special ADHD version of Jono's World,
had an interruption or two.
Where we're going to pick back up is spiritual authority. The spiritual authority that I was used to was basically like whoever your pastor is, whoever your leader is, they have the final say in your life, whether it's moving, whether it's touching your bass guitar, whether it's who you date, whether, like, you know, it's all of those things that, you know, they have the final say in. I mean, I can't tell you how many times where they, you know, told me no to dating, and all of this kind of stuff. And so, like, they really get the ultimate control of your life. Now, is this the kind of setting that you found yourself into at IHOP?
Yeah, I definitely had some experiences where I felt overreach occurred. And that one I tell is just an example. You know, it's not about the bass guitar; it's about the dynamic, right? It's about that overreach into, you know, there's a place where it's no more you and it becomes me, and that is a place that you shouldn't really be entering without me consenting to that. And so, or a place where it's my domain and you don't actually get to establish dominion in that. I don't report to you, I report to God ultimately, and I don't, you know, or even just my own preferences on things I own or how I spend my time outside of this, what is at the end of the day a job. And so there was, go ahead.
Well, you call it a job, but it didn't pay like a job.
No, absolutely. And especially if you're not, you know, signing a steady, livable paycheck, then what I allow you over me is going to be, I get to call some shots there.
Yeah, exactly. Because the little that you do have is completely knotted up in this one leader. Yeah. Like one bad report from the leader, you're out, and there's
exactly,
no
and that is pretty much what happened. They continued to change standards of what would allow me to keep the little bit of pay I did get, and then they ceased paying me but wanted me to continue doing the work. And that was after continual rubs against that spiritual authority issue.
And so this is common, not just at IHOP, but this is common in charismatic churches. Like, this is what people experience, and it's pretty common, and it's why there's so much church trauma.
Yes.
Now, leaving out all the details, and if we cut that bass guitar story out, because we cut the middle section out because of interruptions and all that, basically someone tried to move her guitar without asking, and she goes, "Hey, I got it, don't touch it." And then they got all offended and was like, "You shouldn't talk to your authority that way. You should never tell them no," basically.
In so many words.
In so many words, which is ultimately how that system is manipulated, and so many people get abused. And so multiple situations happen without going
Yes.
into detail. But ultimately, you leave this place with a ton of trauma from leaders, a
Yes.
ton of rejection, a ton of confusion, a ton of like wasted time because now you've done all this stuff, but you don't really have any acceptable experience.
Yep.
And they have added 10 pounds of trauma on top. How do you begin to move forward? Say someone's coming out of a church world, they're realizing, similar to you did, that all of what they believed was uh, not accurate, um, and they don't have, they're at ground zero.
Yep.
What happened whenever you
Um,
tried to get out of that world?
yeah. So, my exit happened in stages. I left staff, but was still, like I said, I came back and substituted on drums and on bass here and there up until about a year after my exit from staff. And then after that, I was involved in a situation where I was advocating for someone that kept me in meetings and conversations with leadership until mid 2018 or late 2018 as well. And so, coming out of it was like peeling off layers of myself. But then the combination of leaving, there's the high school, the college, and then the parachurch organization and negative experiences at multiple places along the way. I was kind of just, I'm done. This has been half a dozen places where
Yeah.
there's been someone mistreating me, someone overstepping with claiming authority into my life in just arenas that don't belong to them. And it wasn't even so much a choice, is that I hit a place where I started having panic attacks at the
Me
idea
too.
of reading the Bible, at the idea of going to a church or sitting through a worship service or playing my instruments anymore. It was a part
Yeah.
of me was taken from me, and then I was punished for that by people saying, well, don't forsake the fellowship, like spiritualizing it in a very painful way.
Yeah,
And I
you're,
was like,
you're going to go to hell if you don't go to
yeah.
church, like the
And
physical church.
that was exactly it, where it's, well, you've forsaken the assembly, you've forsaken a part of your Christian duty. I was like, you know what, God? If you exist, you saw what I went through. And if you send me to hell for that, you're not worthy of worship.
Right.
And if there's a way out of this, you're going to have to bring a miracle into my life, but I can't anymore. And that was it. I fell into, that's a phrase.
Yeah.
But what I saw myself as doing was almost one of the greatest acts of faith I had actually done to that point in my life. And I called it closing my eyes and doing a trust fall backwards into a giant question mark. And very similar to what I had gone through as a teen, where I was like, oh, like everything I thought I knew socially was built on a very strange foundation. Everything that I have been involved in spiritually for time and again seems built on a very strange foundation. And it's been through this one specific niche lens of Christianity. I can't cling to certainty anymore. I need to go into a place of just not knowing and not trying to for a bit, just to untangle from that.
Yeah.
So that's what
But
I
if
did.
you look at it across the board, it's not niche. What they're doing is not niche.
Yeah,
Catholics
absolutely.
have their own versions of it. Like this is the way of the church. Like it
Absolutely.
is our way, or you're deserving of hell. Before Martin Luther, it was if you don't pay this money, you're going to purgatory.
Yeah.
Now, as if you don't go to church, you're going to go to hell. Like you don't pay your tithes, you're going to go to hell.
Yeah.
Like it's the
Exactly.
same. It's the
St. Peter's
same.
Basilica will not build itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, and it's the same trick today. Now, going through going through deconstruction, like falling back into that giant question mark, what were some of the things that begin to unravel as far as like your personing goes? Because like for me, my whole way of thinking, beliefs,
Yeah.
identity, even my belief in eternity, like of living forever and all this kind of stuff was all wrapped up in these beliefs that just went away. Um, for me, it was like grieving a person.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah,
It's a death process. It's a, to borrow a phrase, it's a dying of yourself, or to yourself, of like to the self you thought you knew.
yeah,
It's
it's
a
painful.
death. And if you make it a rebirth, not necessarily into a religion, I'm not talking about deconstruction, reconstruction. This is something on a different level of like, of,
Look, I deconstructed and realized it didn't need to be rebuilt. It's better left on the ground in pieces.
yeah, and that's, if that's where you are, like, you got to do what you can physically and mentally, psychologically tolerate,
Yeah,
or what you, because especially when it's like, oh, I lost these things to panic attacks. Like, it's like, so the unraveling of it all is something bigger than just like, I don't really gel with that approach to that belief anymore or whatever. It's like, no, like, my body won't physically allow me in that expression anymore, or to think those thoughts.
exactly.
There's a physiological toll. It's painful, and I lose days of my life. It's not some choices I'm making. It's not some spiritual attack. It's trauma in my
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
Saying no more, or we die, basically.
Yeah. I remember like at my last role, like I have never felt so much like I was having full blown panic attacks
Yeah,
every Sunday, and I had the simplest like you're talking to someone who preached at one thing in front of 40,000 people.
yeah.
Someone who I've spoken. I don't know,
Ted Lasso,
15.
right?
Oh
He's
my
used to the
gosh.
platform, and then, sorry to spoil for anyone who's not watched a show that's been out for a few years, but yeah,
No, but it's exactly that. It's like all of a sudden, like when I touched the microphone, there was two things that were happening. One, my anxiety was in a place where it was dangerous. And then two, I felt like I was lying to everybody that I was talking to.
yeah,
And so I was just in this weird, really weird, unhealthy place. And then when I finally let it go, like even the idea of eternity, like to go from, we're going to live forever, you're going to see everybody again, this great hope where makes this life feel a little less valuable, a little less important, a little less needed.
it's all gonna burn anyway.
It's all going to burn anyway. It's all
Yeah,
going to turn to ash, building up rewards in heaven by sacrificing everything on earth. When you realize all that is just complete horse crap, like, there's a real pain that hits, and
yeah,
it's like, wow, I just spent all that time. And especially for neurodivergent people, I read something the other day that our brains aren't, I forget what it's called, but what is whenever someone around 24, there's a part of their brain that fully develops?
frontal lobe.
So for us autistic people,
I read that. I saw that one. It's 30 to
35.
35. Yeah. 10 years, and that's, I have had conversations with neurodivergent friends who are autistic ADHD combo.
Life started clicking for me at 35.
Yep. I'm turning 36 in 2 weeks, a week and a half.
Yep.
And it's been a very interesting, there's been some things happening up here.
Yeah, yeah. There was a very distinct thing that happened that year, and I was like, oh, like, there's a mortality that I realized. The foolishness of Christianity and religion in general, I realized. The racial biases that are there.
Yeah.
It was like all of a sudden I saw the autism, the ADHD, and then whatever that is that clicks over in your brain. I went, oh my gosh. And it was just all over.
Yeah.
It was all settled. And there was this very long grieving period.
Absolutely.
And then there's still these times where, like, I find those mindsets still being there.
100%.
You know? And I'm like you really believe in a mythology.
Yeah, it's hard to sit. Yeah, go ahead.
This mythology can somehow actually like do something for you right now.
Yeah. It's hard to have it creep back in because there's like that bittersweet familiarity. But then it's like, right, but why did I leave? And then the pain comes in, and it's like, well, what if I tried again, and then it's like, oh no, like the idea of going to a church still gives me panic attacks.
Me too.
The idea of trying to read the Bible still gives me panic attacks. So it's even when there's that like vacillation, it's like, oh no, but it's still just like not even an option. So I guess that makes it easy.
If you try to explain that to a charismatic person, your panic attack is a demon.
Yep. And that's sometimes you sit there and you're like, what if they're right? What if they're right? What if they're right?
They're not, though.
But every now and then there's that part of me that feels it, and it's like, oh my God, am I going to hell? Oh my God, am I just in rebellion? Do I need to get some oil for the windows? Like, no. We tried all that, and what did it do anyway? Yeah,
your brain is just finally working.
Trying to find something familiar to bring comfort, but then it's like, even if you like try to make a step towards it, the panic attack comes and it's like, no, we're not going over there.
But even then, it's a false comfort.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would rather die knowing that I'm just going to sleep than die with a false hope and like, you know, I would rather just know.
That's real. You kind of got to lean into the thing that you can make the most peace with.
Yeah. And it's painful. It's more painful. And I get why people don't want to believe it.
Yeah.
Because it is far more painful to think that it is lights out, great sleep, than it is to, oh yeah, we're going to be up just chilling in a house waiting on everybody to get here.
Yeah.
If they're lucky enough to get in. But all my loved ones will get in, don't worry.
Yeah, the people like me will be there.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's sometimes I just like to sit and think about like, what if I just don't know? And what if I'm just okay with not having a conclusion either way and the end? I'm
not against the idea of God, and people hear me talk sometimes and they're like completely blown away because, you know, of where I am compared to where I was. And I'm not against the idea of God. I just don't see the evidence that God is evolved enough that,
Absolutely.
like, if there is some sort of creator out there,
Yeah.
then he made it, and he's the one out there still expanding the universe, and he don't
Yeah.
give a dang about what's happening on that
Yeah.
planet.
Absolutely. I like to take it more in like of a theories of consciousness direction. I've been reading a lot about that kind of stuff lately too, where it's like it's not even about a theological question. It's about like, okay, energy is not created or destroyed. What if we're all just recursive mathematical processes happening in some simulation, or not even simulation theory, don't like, but like just literally
Not
like
the Matrix. Not the Matrix.
looking at actual like where does the seed of the soul come from, but without calling it that. Cartesian egos and like philosophical explorations and blah blah blah.
Where does consciousness
Cognitive
come from?
science. Yeah, exactly. Like cognitive science, consciousness theory.
But
blah,
if
blah, blah.
not all bugs, but all life on Earth, even the microorganisms, like if you watch them under a microscope, you will see them react to food. You will see them
stimulus response.
You'll see dogs. You can't tell me dogs don't have full consciousness. They react to fear. They react to danger. They're sad. They're happy. They're excited. Bears. All of these animals have full consciousness. It's not a uniquely human thing. The only thing that is uniquely human is our ability to build and verbalize.
Yes,
and
exactly.
And tribalize.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's that like, well, where is that distinction? Like, if a mosquito sees themselves in a mirror, are they aware that that's themselves?
Right.
Like,
I mean, you see a dog bark at itself in the mirror all the time.
Yeah, they seem to think it's the other dog, but like also like in what way does a dog order its thoughts?
Right.
We don't know because we're not inside their head experiencing life as them.
But there is a consciousness there.
Yeah.
And so, like, it was actually that kind of idea. I remember I was at a zoo and I had this kind of off distance, but like this ape just locked eyes with me and just kind of like stood there like and stared at me. And I was like, oh, this thing is fully like conscious. Like he's staring at me. And he's aware that I'm here. He's aware of my like presence and all of that. And so it was in those moments where I was just like these thing after thing after thing kept happening, and it just kind of led me to go, oh, we're really no different.
Yeah, it's interesting to consider like that kind of empathic bridge into connecting with something so different than you that experiences the world in an utterly different way, but feeling that moment where you're both just engaged with one another.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it was these kind of moments that I kept having with, throughout where kind of just led me to realize that, being human is really just being an extension of like, the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
It's
an interesting thing to ponder. Like,
yeah.
Where is that line? Why do we draw it with ourself?
Why do we draw it with ourselves? And why do we draw it within our races as well?
Because that's how that ends up getting used when you start drawing those distinctions between it. It's like, okay, but like some people start defining Planet of the Apes, right? Where it's like you invert it all of a sudden. It looks kind of funny, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, they don't have souls. They're people. They're not apes like us. Maybe, I don't know. That's something to explore there.
Right.
Maybe dive into with yourself.
Right. And so and then that's just kind of personally where I am. But um, where do you find your comfort at the end of all of this? Like, you've been through, trauma and deconstruction, and you don't really know what you believe about God and all that. But where do you find the comfort in all of this?
I've really taken to video games, which I know sounds maybe funny coming from like a 36-year-old woman. But there's something after being in an experience where a lot of the mistreatment I experienced was around like power and control dynamics, where an experience where you kind of can regain agency, you can like make choices in your own story and just kind of practice that in a low stakes environment, is weirdly healing, because that's like a reparative experience on a certain degree where it's just like, this world, I can learn it. Its rules are similar, like they're defined. Whereas, I've had these multiple experiences of kind of like deconstructing rules and trying to figure them out, which is a very neurodivergent trope, so to speak, of like,
Right.
what rule book are the rest? Did you guys get a handout? Was I absent that day? Right?
Right.
Because there's this seemingly, and it's like, there's that in society, and then there's that in charismatic society on another level of just a lot of invisible lines to trip over, and then suddenly you're pushed out of your speaking roles, etc., where it's like, well, I thought this was like a value we had, and I guess I was wrong.
Right.
But it's so much more defined in a gaming setting like Dungeons and Dragons or a video game, where it's like, I can navigate this world and know how to succeed and have excellence in it, so to speak.
Right. So it gives you a sense of control and normalcy, really,
Yeah.
in a world where, like, especially for girls, like, being neurodivergent isn't necessarily the most helpful thing. You get ignored a lot. You get misdiagnosed. You get dismissed. You get told it's hormonal. You get all those types of things. You get everything but a correct mental health diagnosis.
Yes, and especially when it comes to neurodivergent diagnosis, there is a...
it's all based on boys.
Yeah, women tend to get overlooked a lot, and it's still not equitable experiences, because a lot of the criteria, a lot of people I've been trying to relay, like, hey, like, I'm having this difficulty, I think it could be this. They're like, well, like, they didn't catch this in you as a child, but, well, it was running inside my head instead of my legs, right? Like, it's still that overworking energy thing happening in my body, but because of the way that a woman is socialized, there's a lot more scrutiny on certain behaviors and stuff that are gonna be masked by the expectation placed on you, but the underlying way of thinking and experiencing the world is still the same. Right. So I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until I was like 33, and it took years of actively pursuing someone having a conversation with me in the first place, because they would just be like, well, you're not presenting like a little boy acting out in class, is what they were looking for, basically.
Right. They were looking for me.
And I was a really good kid in school because I was under a fairly authoritarian home environment and stuff, and so like there was a lot of fear around getting in trouble because the consequence would far outweigh the crime in my situation. So
yeah. And so now, as you're older, you don't have the same access to healthcare as you do when you're a kid. You don't, especially mental.
And it gets expensive.
Autism diagnosis can be up to $10,000.
Yeah, that's why I haven't pursued it.
Yeah. And so you find that niche that makes you peaceful, and just regardless if it's embarrassing or not, screw it.
Yeah,
to it.
and it's like it's given me bits of meaning, bits of community, because the way I ended up looking at it was, okay, so I'm in a place where I can't approach a core story in a community of people like I used to, where I can have a story to engage with and to see myself in, to give meaning to experiences I'm having that might be difficult, and just have like characters to relate to like I used to use the Bible for in my life. But I still need like places to get that. And so with connecting with different video game stories, kind of like you get with book fandoms as well. And I started to, I'm sorry, I'm about to say this, but I started to kind of just like heal some of my issues by just starting to treat my relationship with religion more like it was a fandom. And I'm just not a fan of that series anymore. Right. But I'm going to come over into this fandom, and we're going to come together and have this community experience around going through the lore and looking for the story meaning to try and find what might be coming out in the sequel. And it was a lot of the same. It was a place to sublimate a lot of the behaviors that I used to experience in a Christian expression, but just detach any religious connection or meaning to it, but still get a place to kind of wean myself off of religious behaviors by just studying the story of this game, the world of this game, and making sense of it. And so it's totally. So silly to say, but it's like, it's really worked for me.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So, and I do the same thing, like Assassin's Creed, Grand Theft Auto, NBA 2K, NASCAR. I find my games. The podcast is it for me now. I mean, I haven't really played video games since I started the podcast. But, it's just find that thing that gives you peace and that you can maybe generate some money doing and do it.
Yeah. And it's been that switch from, like, what am I coming away from to what am I heading towards?
Right.
Like, it's not necessarily even a creative outlet, but it's just a place to put your time, energy, and, like,
your brain.
Experience growth through. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I have to go pick up my son, so we will wrap up this episode. And I will edit out all the ADHD parts so that it is nice and smooth, hopefully. I might leave some in for comic value, but...
Yeah, sorry. The ramble is real here.
Listen, I have to cut. I am the worst. But everyone, thank you guys for watching. If you're on Spotify, there will be links of how to find her in the bio of this episode. If you're on YouTube, go to Spotify. If you're on Facebook, go to Spotify. It's in the bio, and you can find those links. Anything to say before we say goodbye?
Thanks for having me on. It was a blast to chat with.
This is Jono's World, conversation for everyone.